Welcome to Semi-Retired with Dave Farrant and
Richard Bonomo.
Hey Richard, how you doing this week?
Yeah, I got my booster, so I was off for a couple of days, but it's all good.
Yeah, I got to catch up on that actually. That's booster number 4, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, booster number 2, shot number 4.
Okay, shot number 2. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, shot number 4, booster number 2. Good point. So I think we're talking about one of our favorite topics today, which is the rock music.
Yeah, rock music. This is where we're really going to date ourselves.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm afraid.
All the young kids, like anybody is listening, will be turning the podcast off.
Yeah, this will be an okay boomer.
Yeah,
I think exactly. For sure.
Oh, Dad.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I don't know. Speaking for myself, and I'll turn it over to you after that. Music has been a big part of my life. I'm disappointed I can't play an instrument to this day because I think I would have liked to. I tried to play the guitar once. Yeah. Don't seem to have it. But I love music. And I have since with rock music basically, although I like jazz and classical a bit on the side too. But it always comes back to rock music since I can remember.
Exactly. The only keyboard I can play has letters and numbers on it. Yeah. But I agree. Like my older brother was a bit of a musician, played the accordion early on. I remember because, being half Italian, you have to learn the accordion. So my dad had bought my brother an accordion. And when we were young, he took accordion lessons. And I remember this thing coming out at the Christmas parties and stuff. And
oh my God.
Full-on accordion, which I believe he still has, a full-on accordion. And later on, he was a drummer in a band. So they were him and 3 friends had a band, and they would hold concerts in the backyards, and all the neighbors would come. And I remember he had bought a set of drums that were painted something like shit brown. I forget exactly. And he scraped them off. He scraped the paint off. He got the paint off, and under it was a gold pearl color. And he freaked out because it was the same color as Ringo Starr's drums. He's like, I've got Ringo's drums. I've got Ringo's drums. And he was blown away.
That's pretty impressive, I have to say,
cool.
isn't it?
That's cool.
Yeah, I had, again, I'm not musical myself, but one of my circle of friends when I was in the, 11, 12, 13-year-old time frame. Actually, he was a bit older, guy Mike. He was a drummer, so he had a drum set in his basement, and we'd go down, and he was the guy who had sort of Fat Albert lights, and maybe they had a lava lamp or something like that. Yeah. We used to love listening to music in his basement sort of thing, and we're in Montreal sort of thing, so we're talking early April Wine stuff, Mahogany Rush. That was our kind of thing, and so we were just so impressed that Mike could do and he'd let us sit on his drum set and kind of learn a little beat here and there,
Yeah, it's always wild when you see someone who can play an instrument. We had a friend, this guy George, who would come by with his guitar sometimes, and he would just say, oh, play this, and he would play the solos from whatever. He didn't sing, he just played the guitar, and wasn't electrified, but it was wild. I mean, we'd all sit there watching someone actually make music. It was wild.
Well, just really impressive. To this day, and again, I think as I've gotten older sort of thing, and in the last year, I found myself kind of going back and getting back into music in a more in-depth way. And actually, and we were talking about that before, there's a channel on YouTube with a guy called Rick Beato, who's our age sort of thing. Yeah. And Rick talks about music because I don't understand notes and, octaves and all that. It's all Greek to me sort of thing. But listening to him, I found, has given me I feel a bit more of an appreciation of what's going on in some of my favorite songs. I feel like I hear them with a slightly more educated ear. So I go back and I can kind of sense it. Maybe it's just I'm putting more effort into it. I don't know. But I feel like I've kind of just upped my musical IQ a little bit, or he's helped me up my musical IQ a little bit.
I know that the thing about Rick is he goes on, and he'll I watched him recently doing, I forget which song it was, and he's like, here we go, oh, F, it's a minor 6, it's a 4, and I'm sitting here watching and I'm going, when the band wrote this, were they writing it that way, or were they playing and going, oh, this sounds good, and then putting it down or whatever, or someone going, oh, I should go from an F to a minor 4. I don't know, I'm making things up here.
No, but whatever. I know what you're talking about. Were they actually
sliding that? Because a lot of musicians, I'm not sure where they're, if they have the full musical knowledge of writing sheet music kind of stuff. You hear of a lot of bands who just write music, but don't necessarily, it's not like they have full music knowledge in the same way.
Right. Well, the Beatles famously couldn't read music, right? It was all instinctual with them, they had, it was just a question of knowing what sounds went together well, and they'd practice so much, and so all those songs started flowing out of them. So, no ability to read music. I don't know how that changed for Paul over the years, or, with John or George when they were alive. I don't know.
So, Dave, what's your earliest musical memories, like your parents playing stuff? And
Well, my parents got me a little record player when I was probably, I'm going to say 8 years old or something like that. But the two albums were, one was the Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass.
I think everybody had that. It was a law back then. Yeah.
And then Martin Denny's South Seas Orchestra. And it was like this, it was like a grass shack on the front cover and like sort of a native girl.
Yeah.
And it was songs like, My Little Grass Shack, Cha 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 Cha. I didn't know, right? But I first started hearing music that I guess you would say was, current popular music at our little dances we'd have in grade 5 and 6. They'd play current music sort of. And I can remember like the Archies. And I can remember people talking about Mick Jagger and calling him Old Liver Lips. I knew who he was. But the first, exactly. Yeah. Old Liver Lips, right? Like, at this point, the guy's what, 25, 26 or something?
Yeah.
But the first distinct memory I have is of a babysitter coming to see us, circa 1970, I'm guessing. And she brought the album Abbey Road with her. And I can, she played it. My parents had we had a stereo system in the living room. She put it on. I can remember looking at the album and the four guys and the colors and listening to Come Together, Here Come Old Flat Tubby, Come Grooving Up Slowly. And it made a huge impression on me because I didn't understand what John was saying. I didn't know it was John at the time. I didn't know what the guy was saying. And I still, when I listen to that song now, all these years later, I occasionally can catch an echo of how unusual it sounded to me in my ears when I was hearing it, and when holds you in his armchair, you can feel his disease, which I found kind of really creepy at the time. Anyways, that's mine.
Oh yeah, but you didn't get the toe jam footballs?
No, that was probably the toe jam football.
As a kid, that was a great line. You're like toe jam.
Yeah, of course, I don't think I knew what toe jam was until later, sort of thing. But it just the whole thing was just so exotic sounding. And then there was Maxwell Silverhammer, which is kind of funny sounding, and like the ding ding and Rose and Gallery, blah blah blah. I don't recall listening to
that's a Paul song.
That's
right?
a Paul. It's a
Paul silly song, which he has a lot of.
Yeah.
For me, early memories would be I remember in the same way. My brother, I can still see it. We're in the kitchen at our old house, and my brother's got his portable turntable with the you lift up the cover.
Yeah.
The speaker, I think, was in the cover.
Yeah.
And he played a 45 of a Beatles thing. And I remember him saying, this is the Beatles, and telling me this is the Beatles. I was too young to understand. My brother was 6 years older than me. But I always remember to this day the 45 with the sliced apple on it.
Yeah,
right? Because it was
absolutely.
Apple record. And so I can't remember which year that was. No idea. I can't remember what song it was, but I remember that's my first introduction to the Beatles. But in terms of music, my dad, I don't remember my dad really listening to music much. And my parents had one of those big stereos, big pieces of furniture with records, and I would flip through. And there was a lot of, there was some Dean Martin in there, and my mom had a lot of Chantal Paris and Ginette Renault and whatever.
Yeah.
But one of my big memories is my mom listening to French country music.
Really, eh?
On the radio. Tex Lacard and Félix
Lacard.
Leclerc and all this stuff playing constantly on the little black radio in the kitchen.
Why do I remember Tex Lacard?
Yeah, he became a big painter, I believe.
did he?
Is it Tex Lacard or Félix? I think it's Tex Lacard. Yeah. And on my first honeymoon, I was up in a little town near Quebec City. I forget where we were staying. And there was an art gallery in the hotel, and there was a whole bunch of his paintings there selling for a couple of $1,000.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's funny you say. Like music was not a big part of my parents' life.
Yeah.
We had albums there. My parents had the same sort of 12 albums when they retired. I mean, there was an Ella Fitzgerald. There was The Sound of Music. My father to this day likes show music, not really my thing, or I think he liked Judy Garland, whatever sort of thing, not at all. So it didn't come from that, but I'd forgotten one early incident, which I'll just go through, was the family across the street from where we grew up had a couple of older kids in the house. They were like they're basically hippies, right? The long hair and all that. And Michael was a guitar player. So Michael would sit in his little bedroom upstairs with an amp and a guitar, and he would just play the guitar. We could hear him at night because all our windows were open. I don't think anybody had air conditioning, so you'd hear this kind of going on sort of thing. And on a couple of occasions, he let me sit in the room and watch him play. And I remember him talking about Cream. What did I know? I didn't Cream, but I remember Cream talking about Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. And I don't think I knew a Hendrix song from A Hole in the Wall, but the name stuck in my head sort of thing. It was kind of starting to front load me for getting more interested,
I remember my first Hendrix memory is being at school. We had this, they had like a smoking club at school. Imagine you were allowed to smoke, but you could only do it in a certain room. And I can't remember where the hell this was. And in there, they had a turntable and records and whatever, and the cool kids would go, and I didn't smoke, but I would go because my friends did, and we would go there, and they would play music. And I remember hearing "Let Me Stand Next to Your Fire" by Jimi Hendrix and thinking, the stupidest fucking lyrics I've ever heard in my life. Let me stand next to your fire. It took like about a year, and I kind of got an appreciation for it at the time, but I didn't quite get it then. But as a kid, I remember listening to CKGM. I mean, that was the radio station for kids. Yeah. My brother listened to Shom. Yeah. And, Shom was like, we were like, Shom, what the hell is that? We used to come up with all sorts of acronyms for Shom, what it stood for, like to try to make fun of him or whatever. And CKGM. And then I had a friend of mine who introduced me to a radio station called CFox.
Yeah, CFox. I remember CFox. Yeah.
And I don't remember where the hell they were. I know CFox existed as a radio station out of Vancouver, but really, I can't imagine we would have been able to catch a station out of Vancouver in Montreal.
Yeah, I doubt that too, sort of thing.
Like I know AM has a long range, but that's a hell of a long range.
That's a long range. Yeah, that's long range. Yeah, because CKGM was the AM station, right? Yeah. And that's where we got our top 40 stuff. And I had like a little radio by that point, one of these little kind of, portable, you could hold it in your hand radios and you'd hear the whatever. And, of course, Shom was the FM station, right? Where the hippies listen. I can recall us, sitting with my buddies at that point, trying to listen to Shom, but it was almost like it was too much for us, right? Yeah. And they had a habit then, you'll remember this, I'm sure, of like playing an entire album. And you'd be like, all we could sort of grasp was like the 3-minute pop song, right? Yeah. So it didn't really stick. So yeah, CKGM was it,
CKGM, yeah, with Ralph Lockwood.
Ralph Lockwood,
that's right. Who ended up opening up
the Birdman. The Birdman.
Yeah, he opened up Birdie's downtown. He opened up his own bar. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
I had
a
friend of mine who worked there, I believe.
Oh yeah, he was
Birdie's.
funny.
There was a bird cage or something like some sort of bird cage on the outside of the place. Right. Yeah, Ralph the Birdman Lockwood.
Lockwood. Yeah.
That's probably the only DJ I can name from CKGM back then. That and CFox. CFox was weird because you couldn't always get it clearly. I remember they would sometimes play clearer at night when maybe there wasn't other interference, and I could only get it sort of in the bedroom at certain points of the day. As far as that's what I remember living out in the East End.
Yeah, I don't recall ever listening to it. I'm aware of the name. Yeah. CFox. I just stuck in my head. Yeah. I don't,
I was given for one of my birthdays a radio. Yeah. And I still remember it was brown and it had like a leatherette cover on the back.
Did,
and I remember it had like 2 snaps on the back and you pull down this door and you would stick the batteries in it. And you could run it on batteries, which of course lasted like an hour or whatever back then. But I would keep it plugged in. And I had this thing where I had to listen to music at night to go to sleep. It used to drive my brother crazy. My younger brother slept in the same room as me. And it would drive him insane because he couldn't sleep as the music was on. And I couldn't sleep as the music was off. And so listening to music all night long, that was my thing, like constantly. And I think during the day I would listen to CKGM, and at night I would switch it over to CFox because I could catch it at night. It's weird. I remember that. And listening to the stuff. So this music got, they could have brainwashed me by passing subliminal messages through the music back then. But those are my early memories of music and buying 45s when I got a little job and was able to earn a few dollars in buying 45s of whatever was popular at the time before I kind of developed my own taste drifted more towards rock music or whatever, but whatever was popular. So there would have been some disco 45s and some. I don't remember if it was my brother or me who had the Lou Rawls "You'll Never Find."
Oh my God!
One of us had that 45.
I forgot that song. Yeah. You'll never find.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff. So those I can't remember what was my first 45, but I know I had a little stack of. We would torture my poor mom. Yeah. So my brother had this little white stereo. That you would pop the cover off, and I think the speaker might have been integrated into the bass. I'm trying to remember, and it was like a small thing. So like if you put an album on it, the album would hang off the edge of the stereo. Yeah. And so I remember being at the country house. So this would have been after 77 when we built the country house. And we'd sit there and we'd torture my poor mom to make us listen to our 45s. And we'd play them one after another. And she'd have to sit there pulling her poor hair out, listening to like 24 songs in a row. Because I had like 12, he had 12. And we each had to compete to see whatever,
Well, yeah, I like you. I had my 45s, because I could afford it. They were like $1 or something like that. I remember buying 99 cents was a 45 RPM. So I can remember buying, I think maybe the first one I bought, song nobody's going to know. It's by a singing duo called Mouth and McNeil. How Do You Do?
Mouth and
McNeil. And I actually added it to my iTunes library a couple of years ago. So I remembered it and thought I can probably find it. Sure enough, it's there. Everything is. And like he's Dutch or something like that. And they're singing in their second language. And it's really like
they're a Dutch pop duo.
There you go. Dutch pop duo. Why that attract? I don't know. On a slightly more elevated plane, around the same time I bought Superstition by Stevie Wonder. Oh. But I think I returned it. This was, it was like $1 was a lot of money. I think I bought it. Why did I buy it? I don't know. Brought it home, decided I didn't, I wasn't happy with my purchase and brought it back to the record store. God only knows, And do you remember the K-Tel compilations?
Oh, of course.
Hey.
Did you have the K-Tel record thing where you would put an album in and then you could tip it and the albums would kind of like just tip forward and you could cycle through your whole album thing? Yeah.
I've forgotten that, but you're right. We did have that. Yeah. So those were all those were the super poppiest, crappiest pop songs at the time, right? Yeah. You get like Bobby Sherman on there and the DeFranco family and all this. So that was probably, what my brother's slightly younger than me. So that's probably what we had in the house. I don't recall buying the K-Tel records.
I remember seeing them. I don't know if I ever had any, but I remember seeing that they were like they were the compilations of their day. Yeah.
20
the Spotify playlist of its day.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was absolutely sort of. I mean, you weren't getting the Beatles on there. You weren't getting Deep Purple on there. You were getting, again, all these like kind of, third-rate acts sort of things. So that was kind of it. And then I remember specifically when I got to high school, this is 1972, I can recall the Alice Cooper song, School's Out, being a big deal. Yeah. And, again, you're in school and, it was speaking directly to us. And the hippies across the street would listen to Alice Cooper. So I became aware of Alice Cooper and why did Alice Cooper have a woman's name? There was no way to find this out. And it had this very exotic sound to me. So I started listening to Alice Cooper. No, I didn't. The group across the street had the albums, so we could listen to them over there. I wasn't buying albums at this point.
I guess we should note we're almost the same age. You're 3 years older than I am.
Yeah, that's about
right. So we're of the same generation.
Absolutely, close enough too.
So I remember you remember the first album you ever bought on your own?
I think I'm quite sure. I mean, I'm not positive, and you think I would be. But I think it might have been Elton John's greatest hits. Albums were like running like $4.99 at the time. We had a little record store in the local mall. We'd go down. Yeah. Again, why I picked Elton John, I don't know. How I even knew about him, I don't know. Because, we weren't buying, there was no internet. There was no, I don't even know how I knew these artists existed. I guess hearing them on the radio must have been it. Yeah. And liking a song and going, okay, I want to hear that, right? Sort of thing. Like maybe it was something like Crocodile Rock. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it was Elton John.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, I wanted to buy Spanish Train and Other Stories by Chris de Burgh.
Good one. Yeah.
I love the song. And I was a big Chris de Burgh fan. After I ended up buying the album, but I was a huge Chris de Burgh fan. And we had a record store on the corner of our street. And there was another one a block away and half a block up in residential areas where this is not commercial areas. There was a record store on the corner and
nice.
I would buy my 45s there. They didn't have a lot of albums. So if you wanted albums, you went to the one that was up on Delormier. So you walked to the corner.
Oh, you were in that area. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then you walked one block over and then I think you walked half a block up or a block. Anyways, very walkable back when you were there. And so my brother's like, no, don't buy that. Don't buy that. Buy this instead. And he told me I should buy Aja by Steely Dan.
Oh my God, that's
so
a leap.
I had kind of knew what it was, so I went out and I bought it reluctantly.
Yeah.
And I came home, and back then, what did you do with the record? When you bought an album, you had to listen to the whole thing,
absolutely,
to make sure it didn't skip.
Right,
because you had duds, and it was not that infrequent that you'd buy a record and there'd be a defect in it. And so I put on Aja by Steely Dan. And I was too young to really appreciate it. And it skipped. One of the songs skipped. And I remember I returned it. Yeah. And I bought Spanish Train and Other Stories by Chris de Burgh. And I was so happy.
Corrected your error? Yeah.
Yeah. I corrected my error. And I came home and I bought that. And I played that record front to back. And then I bought a few others by him. But I think to me, he's had much bigger songs. The Woman in Red, Lady in Red, whatever. Terrible period. I think some artists peaked at a certain point. Chris de Burgh, I think, peaked at Spanish Train. I like
Patricia the Stripper. I thought that was a riot.
Oh, yeah. Was that on that album?
Spaceman Came Traveling, right? That was on there, I think. Yeah,
I think the Spaceman is on that album.
I feel like it was too. Yeah. Actually, I want to revise my Elton John album. I think the first album I bought was April Wine's album On Record that Could Have Been a Lady on it. And we were we were aware of April Wine because they came to my high school in the fall of 1972. And I went to see them for 75 cents. This is the way things are. So you think of how the industry's changed. So you have a Canadian band, right? I think we knew they were Canadian, touring behind like a heavy hit single on the radio. And there was also Bad Side of the Moon. So they were quite prominent. And you were going and they were playing in a high school gym to like 300 or 400 kids for 75 cents was your thing. And this was like one of these life-changing events because I went there. I can remember smelling what was obviously pot. I didn't know because my parents were always saying like, if whenever you go, don't take drugs, right? Don't let people force you to take drugs, right? That whole thing. And just seeing the band with the light show, they were doing the light show with the kind of like the oils and all that, which kind of was still a thing at the time. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like this was a completely exotic experience, not a pop band either, a good little hard rock and Canadian band. So I think that was my first album. I just wanted to correct that.
Yeah. April Wine I saw a few times in concert and always a really good show. Rick Mercer would put on his crazy 20-minute drum solos. But it's funny, you mentioned Bad Side of the Moon. We were talking a couple weeks ago and I mentioned that I had seen a show and they used an April Wine song. It was Bad Side of the Moon. It's a show on Amazon Prime called The Lake. It's a cheesy Canadian show about the lake kind of thing, which we managed to track from words they've mentioned. We tracked the exact spot in Nova Scotia where it's filmed.
Oh yeah,
but it's Bad Side of the Moon is the opening song for the show,
which is actually an Elton John song.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
really?
Yeah. That was a
the
cover.
Same version.
Yeah, that was April Wine covered Elton John. Yeah,
well, I'm gonna have to listen to that.
Yeah, it's on one of his earlier. It might be. It's not even Tumbleweed Connection. It might be the first album. I think was titled just Elton John, and it's from that. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think from there, at some point, you get to high school, you start listening. Your musical tastes change a little bit.
Yeah.
You get influenced by friends and stuff. And I remember getting to high school and hanging out with my friends. And it was a thing back then that after school, you would go to a friend's house and you would just listen to music.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
My mom, I'd come home for supper and mom would say, hey, where were you? I was like, I was at such and such house. And like, what were you doing? We're listening to music. What do you mean you were listening to music? Yeah. Like we were listening to music. We sat on the couch and we listened to, 4 albums, whatever. And to my parents, it seemed a little weird. Because I don't think it's something they would have done back then is just go to a friend's house and just listen to music.
Yeah, I think not. I think that was really something of the time. I recall doing the same thing.
Yeah. And it was a thing where I would come home from school sometimes and I would just go in the basement and I would put on a Led Zeppelin record and I would just play the whole thing until my mom called me and said supper time and I'd go up.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the afternoon. That was it. You just listened to the music.
Yeah.
I mean, I know with the advent of the iPods and Spotify and everything, people listen to music all the time now, but I'm not sure people have the same kind of interaction we did where we would go to a friend's house to listen to music.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, specifically a group music listening session. I doubt that happens. Like I'm sure with my 2 daughters who are both in their mid to late 20s, I don't think they ever do that. For them, music is kind of something that they have in their head when they're,
their ears. That's
in their ears sort of thing. But I doubt, and again, I don't think people, maybe I'm wrong here. I'm going to sound like, okay, boomer Luddite here sort of thing. But I don't know that people sit down and listen to entire albums anymore the way we did, front to back.
No one does. I mean, with the advent of the Sony Walkman, really the music went out of speakers and into your ears. And I had a Sony Walkman. It wasn't my first one. My first one was some bastard brand, maybe a Panasonic or a Sanyo at the time. But I remember when I was working in the pharmacy and I was able to afford an actual Sony Walkman, and that thing was just beautiful.
I had it too.
Until I dropped it.
I had it too.
Yeah, and then it shattered.
I had a guy actually buy it for me in New York City because you couldn't get them in Montreal. I don't recall why. And this guy I knew, Nick something or other, was going to New York City for the weekend. So I gave him $100 or whatever. And he came back with my Walkman. I was like, that's it. I'm made, right?
Yeah.
I'm made.
I had a red Sony Walkman that had only FM radio and a cassette. There was no AM, which I kind of pissed me off because I used to like listening to baseball games on the radio back then. It was compact. And when you wanted to play a cassette, you would actually pull the side out and it would expand. And then you'd open the door and put a cassette in. When you were done, you could close it down so it was smaller in your pocket. Completely useless feature, but the fact they could do it was interesting.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny. I think I can't recall whether mine had a radio component. I feel like I just remember listening to. I'd make my tapes, right? Because I had a little tape recorder sort of thing. So I'd tape all my put my fucking microphone in front of the way you would, right? It's so low tech.
The mixed tape, exactly.
I listened to those tapes so often that to this day, when a certain song ends that might have been on one of my tapes from back then,
You're waiting for
I'm waiting for the next song because it was just, because, again, you were locked into that order, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you put on your tape, you were done.
Yeah.
And you weren't going to go back and remake it.
Yeah, so I remember going to high school, and that would have been the late 70s, whatever. New wave music started coming out. I was into rock music, and I remember, it's funny, I have the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin. The two songs that got me into those bands are not typical of those bands.
Okay.
So I can still remember clear as day hearing the first time I heard Dire Maker by Zeppelin.
Yes.
Which is not your typical...
No, it's not actually. It's not.
It's kind of softy all over the kind of place. But I remember hearing that and going, who the fuck is this?
Yeah.
And I think, well, this was Dire Maker by Led Zeppelin. And I was like, oh, that's what everybody's freaking out on and discovering Zeppelin, right? And the same thing for the Rolling Stones, it was Miss You.
Okay.
Which is not your standard. I mean, it's no Jumpin' Jack Flash.
No, it's not.
But it was the thing. And Stones were okay. I was never a huge Stones fan because I guess I was part of that Stones versus Beatles kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which one do you prefer? If you like one, you can't like the others. And I think for the longest time, I really wasn't a big Stones fan. I've come to appreciate them as I've gotten older, which sounds silly. And I have friends who are big Stones fans or whatever, but this, like to me, the Beatles put out what is probably the greatest catalog of music in 6 years? 7 years? Over by the time they're 27?
Indisputably.
Yeah. And the fact, the Rolling Stones are still around. I'm like, yeah, but what have they done since the late 70s? Honestly, nothing after that should exist.
Well, I would argue that their last, kind of really strong album was the one that had Missed You on it, Some Girls in 1978. And at that point they're in their early to mid 30s and they've had a great career. All the great albums are behind them. Exile on Main Street and Sticky Fingers and Let It Bleed and all that and Beggar's Banquet. And they kind of went through that, I thought, slightly sappy period in the early to mid 70s, like, with Black and Blue and Goat's Head Soup and Fool to Cry. And then...
Don't forget the semi-disco period.
Oh, yeah, the semi-disco, exactly. And then suddenly, Some Girls was kind of a rockin' album again. I bought it at the time and went to see the concert where they were performing that album, or they were touring to support the album, which was held in Buffalo in 1978, July 4th. Shom, we mentioned earlier, the FM radio station here put on a trip to Rich Stadium. So we all went down to the bus station at midnight with our tickets, got bussed down to Rich Stadium, and then got in there around noon sort of thing and saw April Wine, act we mentioned. The Atlanta Rhythm Section, Journey, who I came back loving. I didn't even know who they were.
Oh, yeah.
Loving, touching, squeezing, and lights and all that. And then, of course, the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And I remember being so impressed with that because Mick Jagger was wearing a pair of green Adidas with a white kind of jacket sort of thing that I actually had to get myself. And I was not like this. I had to get myself a white jacket, which I found in a secondhand store, and a pair of green Adidas. I combed downtown Montreal, found green Adidas, and I thought, that's it. I've made it. Like, I'm it, But
so Some Girls 78 and then Emotional Rescue in 1980, which was a huge shock. I remember when it came out at the time, everybody's like, what the hell is this?
I'm still saying that, I think,
Yeah. Then Tattoo You. Undercover, it's funny. I remember having the CD for Undercover.
I wouldn't even know what song is on it.
Undercover had Undercover of the Night. What else was on there?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear that.
She Was Hot and Tie You Up in Love, Wanna Hold You. Feel On Baby, Too Much Blood, Pretty Beat Up. Some song still had a bit of core Rolling Stones sound with a bit of modernness to it,
right?
But definitely nothing like their other stuff. And a lot of people talk about the Exile on Main Street as being this super fantastic album.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I have to tell you of Exile on Main Street.
I'm trying to find the songs here: Rock Soft, Rip This Joint, Shake Your Head,
Tumbling Dice,
Sweet
Virginia,
Torn and Freight, Sweet Black Angel,
Turd on the Run.
Is it? Yeah. Oh, you're right. Turn on the Run. But I'm looking at this, and very quickly, the only song I recognize is Tumbling Dice.
Yeah. Well, it's not a singles type album. It's more
a double album too.
It's a double album. It's more of a groove sort of thing. I mean, they all kind of hang together well. Like if you wanted to sit down and listen to an album, that would be a good album to sit down and listen to. But yeah, you weren't getting Jumpin' Jack Flash off it. Well, that's 4 years earlier. You weren't getting Brown Sugar off of it. You weren't getting. You Can't Always Get What You Want, or Give Me Shelter. Which is probably my favorite Stones song is Give Me Shelter. But yeah, like you said earlier, I wasn't a Stones fan in the mid 70s. I knew who they were. I'd heard Honky Tonk Women, knew what that was. Probably couldn't name their albums. I was kind of more of a Beatle guy, because you remember the Beatles compilations, the Red and Blue albums came out in the mid '70s.
Yeah.
My brother and I had those, so we must have bought those. I don't know why we had those, and that's where we'd sit and listen to all those songs and be introduced to, While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Don't Let Me Down, blah blah blah. With no sense of the structure of the Beatles.
Exactly, right? Because it was at the time I didn't realize that those were greatest hits. I forget. I don't know if I had them or a friend had them, but I remember listening when we didn't have both. We had one of them. One of them was like the early stuff, and one was the later stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, look at what album are we here? Sticky Fingers here. Brown Sugar, Sway, Wild Horses. Can you hear me knocking? You Gotta Move, Bitch. I Got the Blues. Sister Morphine, Dead Flowers, and now that's an album.
They're all good, and they're all good.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all. I don't think there's a weak song on there. Love it.
So I remember when I was working in pharmacy, we had Muzak. You remember Muzak?
Oh yeah, I do remember Muzak.
So Muzak was a radio station, and you had a special receiver set up in your AV cabinet that would be hooked up to your speakers.
See, that I didn't know.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I didn't know either until the day I opened the cabinet and I found this thing because we were staying overtime, and I had my employees with me, and we were like, can we change the station on this thing? And that's when we realized the receiver was there, and I noticed that there was audio in. And so I had my Walkman, and I plugged my Walkman into the AV system, and I started playing Bitch right.
Great song, great choice.
Great song. And all the guys were a bit younger than me, but everybody was like into the scene kind of thing. And it became like the standing thing every time. As soon as the doors would close, there'd be a guy at the AV cabinet, the doors would close, the tape would go on, boom, we'd be listening to the stuff. And it was a great way to motivate the employees and get everybody going. Like, we typically had to do 20 minutes, half hour of overtime just to do the facing on the shelves, put everything back, kind of stuff, clean up before the next day. And it was a nice way to close out the day also.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the closest I got to something like that was I was working at the Bay, and where I was in the housewares department, right across the way was the record department sort of thing. They would play records all day sort of thing. And this was when kind of disco was starting to happen. This was like Saturday Night Fever and all that, which we thought was like the end of the world. Yeah. And they kept playing You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone, right? And we were just like,
I hate to admit, I may have had the 45.
No, you didn't.
Yes. But I had a huge crush on her.
You exchanged money for it?
At the time, I was a kid, and I remember I saw her on TV somewhere, and I had this gigantic crush on her.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Oh, my God.
The dark parts of my life, yeah.
Well, we went over there, actually, because we would get in to work early before the store opened, sort of thing. We'd be in there arranging the merchandise, whatever we were doing. And we went to, I can't listen to that anymore, sort of thing. So we went over, we found where all their records were. They had like a little stack there they were playing. Got the Debbie Boone album, and we'd gotten a nail from the hardware department, and we just scratched right through You Light Up My Life. And put it back in the sleeve, went back to work, kind of stocking the toasters or whatever we were doing, and that was the end of that,
I'm trying to find a photo from back then. She was super cute. Anyways, whatever. Those are guilty pleasures that you don't. Of course, I'd forgotten that till you unlocked that memory.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
But speaking of records, I remember listening to Show'em one day back when they used to play, like, as you mentioned, playing a whole album. And I remember I cannot remember what album it was, and I don't remember the DJ. And I forget if he pulled the Johnny Fevers, pulled the needle across the record, broke the record off. This is a piece of shit, and threw it away. And I always remember saying, wow, you can actually do those kind of things. And, I think I saw it later on WKRP in Cincinnati, right. But I had experienced it over the air.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great show, for music lovers.
Oh, yeah.
I love that, this sort of thing. I mean, I think they're starting to appear on YouTube now. For years, you couldn't watch them. There was some kind of, licensing dispute or something, but they're beginning to show up. They're just as funny now as they were then,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I just, you mentioned Johnny Fever and like Venus Flytrap, right? Like, I love those guys, Like, I probably recall thinking at that point, like, being a DJ would be fun,
Oh, yeah. It made the whole lifestyle so really, really cool, But of course, with God as my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
Right. Well, speaking of crushes, I mean, who didn't have a crush on Bailey Quarters?
Exactly.
I think,
everybody did. Exactly.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Guilty as charged.
The old men had crushes on Lonnie Anderson.
Yes.
And the younger one, the younger crowd had crushes on Bailey Quarters.
I think that's right. Exactly. Yeah, I was never a Lonnie Anderson fan,
No, it's too much.
Yeah, it's just too much. Yeah, sugar cake,
Sugar cake. Yeah, exactly. It's like a powdered donut.
So yeah, so like coming out of high school, that was like the era of like the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac. And, you had the weird ones like Kiss in there. Were you ever a Kiss fan?
Yes, I was. My friend of mine had Rock and Roll Over, I think it was. It was a red album cover with a circle. And I think it said Rock and Roll Over. I can't remember what songs were on there. But yeah, we were a bit of a Kiss. Not huge. I mean, that album, I think it kind of caught us by surprise. It was a whole... other thing, and I remember them doing Beth on like the Grammys or something.
Yes.
And it was the first time I had seen an award show, because back then, award shows, you watched all the award shows because there was nothing else on TV. You had 4 channels, right? Yeah. Like if you had cable, you might have had more. Yeah, you might have 12 then. And I remember they were getting an award, whatever. They were performing, but they performed from somewhere else. And so it was the first time I had ever seen where they were on a screen and they performed Beth that way.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have that memory of Kiss. But then,
I had a friend.
My infatuation with Kiss was maybe a year.
Yeah, I had a buddy, Wes, who was a Kiss fan, so he would buy the albums. I was. And I, at that point, actually was getting into, I know we're jumping around here, but I was getting into Genesis.
Okay, yeah.
And I bought, probably listening to Show 'em Now, and I bought A Trick of the Tail.
Oh, yeah.
And after that, kind of, because the thing I always remember about Genesis was when we would go and poke around that little record shop that I mentioned in the mall near our place. We just like leaf through the records, right? Yeah. And ding, ding, ding. And I remember looking at the Genesis albums. They had those unusual album covers with the paintings on them. Yeah. And then there was the one Genesis Live that was always selling for $3.99.
Okay.
Right? When albums were $5.99 and $6.99. And I might have bought that before Trick of the Tail, just because it was like, I can get an album for $4 and this looks interesting. And Peter Gabriel's on the front cover. You see the band and it's like all blue light and he's got one of his weird costumes on. But I was getting into Genesis. That was that kind of, because the prog rock was still big then, right?
Oh, it was huge. Montreal
was big on that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Genesis came, all the bands, all the prog rock bands came, they were huge here. Supertramp was huge here. I was a huge Supertramp fan.
Supertramp, yeah.
I was a big fan. I saw them in concert.
Oh, you did, eh?
It's just as they were breaking up or just after, but I remember, it was in that period. You're like, no, they're breaking up. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it was that whole,
that was a huge concert in high school that my more worldly friends went to. So that was around Crime of the Century.
Yeah.
I would like School and Bloody Well Right and all that stuff. And I can recall us listening to that, my friend's house, or again, just sitting there and listening to like, dun, dun, and all that. And I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah. See, my brother was a huge Bowie fan. My older brother was a gigantic Bowie fan, and I remember him like when we would do Easter. In our family, we did the Easter. They got one aunt did Christmas, another one did New Year's, whatever.
Right.
And so my brother and my older cousins, they would sit there and they would hold court back then and talk about Bowie and whatever and the latest albums and stuff. And I was not necessarily a big Bowie fan back then. Later on, it caught on, but not early on. But his record guy, he had the Genesis albums. He had some of the Paul McCartney stuff. I remember Red Rose Speedway and a few of those albums in his collection. So a lot of the stuff, like Genesis, I think I got into the later stuff in the 70s, probably as
the Phil Collins stuff, right?
Probably, maybe just a little bit before, and then when the Phil Collins stuff came on, I remember those couple albums there with Mama and Down Home by the Sea.
Yeah,
those were huge hits at the time where Phil Collins was everywhere. Genesis was coming out with hit after hit.
Yeah.
Phil Collins' solo was going hit after hit to the point where even Phil Collins said he's fed up of hearing himself on the radio. And I think he took a step back and let some time go.
He got overexposed. There was something. I think it was one of those big concerts in the early 80s where he appeared in New York as part of this extended broadcast, then flew to London and appeared in London. You were like, for God's sake, Phil.
Well, didn't he do that for Live Aid?
Maybe it was Live Aid.
Yeah, it was Live Aid.
Maybe I'm thinking Live Aid. Yeah. And it was just like, okay, sort of thing. Like really, like, oh my God.
And I remember when Robert Plant toured for his solo album, I forget the name of it now. Phil Collins was playing drums.
No kidding.
On his touring band. Yeah.
He's a terrific drummer. I mean, in Genesis, to me, that's one of the great joys of listening to Genesis records is his drumming. He's got this incredibly precise, sound to him that nobody else. I mean, like you talk about great drummers. There's Keith Moon, who has his kind of explosive, cascading, multi-symbolic sound or whatever. So then you got Phil's got this kind of very precise thing going on. It's beautiful stuff.
Keith Moon, It's like we lost Keith Moon and John Bonham 3 years apart.
Yeah,
the two
weird,
of the biggest rock drummers of all time. If you name any rock drummer, those are the two. I guess you could you can mention the drummer from April Wine was also Jerry Mercer was well renowned at the time, but probably not internationally. Like obviously,
did he die? Did Jerry Mercer die?
No, I don't think
okay.
so. No,
Okay,
it was just it's April Wine,
right? Yeah, it's April Wine. Yeah.
But fun to see in concert, and the drummer for the Rush also would be another one.
Yeah, I never saw Rush, and I regret. I'm not even sure if I had the opportunity. I don't recall going. Oh, they're here. I won't go. But I've learned a bit like you were saying with Bowie. I've kind of like rediscovered them later in life. Like I thought Bowie was a bit icky at the time. Like I didn't like his appearance. Put me off. I mean, I guess I was a bit of a straight kid sort of thing.
Okay.
I couldn't understand all the orange hair and the makeup and all that. That was like just found that weird. So I skipped his songs as a result.
Yeah, I saw Rush. I think 2 or 3 times. It was amazing, amazing concert.
Really,
That 3 guys can make that much sound. I'm not going to say. I used to say noise, but it's not noise. Those 3 guys can make that much sound is amazing.
Yeah.
Now that is a concert to see. It was. I saw them. I think at least twice.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, and speaking of Bowie, my brother, a big Bowie fan, he actually had it's the Aladdin Sane. You remember Aladdin Sane with the paint
lightning
streaks?
flash?
Well, my brother had those lines painted on his wall.
Oh.
And I remember as a kid, he convinced my dad to be able to paint his room, and he had taped it all up, and he had made the lines, and I think it crossed 2 walls. It started on one side and went across the back wall or something. Yeah.
Is it just, maybe I just figured this out 50 years too late, but did you pick up on the pun in Aladdin Sane?
Well, there's,
it's
Aladdin
insane, I think, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not spelled that way, but this struck me, I don't know when. I was like, oh, that's clever, Because, of course, it's spelled, for those who haven't seen it, it's spelled Aladdin from 1001 Arabian Nights, and then sane, but if you re-emphasize it, it's Alad insane.
Yeah, exactly.
Which referring to himself, I guess.
It's a cute pun. I don't know if it was intended at the time.
So it wasn't just me then, right?
No. Well,
okay.
no, maybe didn't pick it up right away, but I did at some point.
40 years later or 50 years later, it took me that long. It just suddenly struck me one day.
So we go, you go back to the 70s. You mentioned the album covers of Genesis and album covers in the 60s and 70s. Aren't they like masterworks? You look at those things. I always remember, especially in the 70s, you had Hypnosis. You remember the company
Hypnosis, yeah.
They did the Pink Floyd albums. They did all the big albums back then were Hypnosis. And you could tell they had that look. Very strange concepts. There's... is it the Pink Floyd cover for Wish You Were Here with the guy's on fire?
He's on fire. That's right.
And
Wish You Were
I
Here.
remember they actually set a guy on fire. Today would be CGI.
Yeah, it would be
then
CGI,
it's like, no, CGI. No, we set a guy on fire.
Yeah.
So it's pretty.
Well, look, we both, graphic design has been a key part of our careers. I was getting into graphic design in the late 70s, and I remember thinking I'd love to design albums. I mean, because it was just, that was it. And there was also all that like unusual packaging, like Rolling Stone's Sticky Fingers with the zipper in the front, Yeah. And, the album, again, the fold out albums, the albums with the lyrical booklets, the album cover itself was an experience.
Exactly.
I mean, again, you could sit there listening to the music and you'd have something to look at. Liner notes, yeah. Yeah.
That's something the advent of the CD really killed, because I mean, it's the same artwork.
Right, yeah.
When you're looking at it with 5x5 versus what's an album? It's
12 by 12.
12 by 12, yeah. There's a huge difference, especially like, as you mentioned, albums that would open up and the lyrics might be inside, or some stories or extra photos. And even some of the albums would have had interesting little liners, like when you'd pull the record out, a lot of them had that, clearish kind of plastic.
That's right.
But some of them might have had a paper cover there where you'd open up and the lyrics might be on there.
Well, Led Zeppelin did that with Led Zeppelin 4 with Stairway to Heaven. I mean, the lyrics were printed on the album envelope. Won't call it the sleeve, it's a record with the sleeve. So that was a huge part of it. And I've got a book somewhere in here, I think still, like sort of best album cover art of the period. Some beautiful stuff there. Much simpler than just a photograph of the band,
It's funny, as you mentioned album covers. You remember Phil Hartman, the great comedian?
Yes.
Phil Hartman?
Yes.
Phil Hartman designed some famous album covers.
Oh, did he? No, I think I knew that he was also a graphic designer, which to me is a weird thought. But I don't recall what albums he was involved with.
He did some of the Eagles ones. I'm trying to find it. I'll get back to it. But he did some interesting album covers. And I remember discovering. I mean, I love Phil Hartman. I could go 2 hours on just Phil.
Well, let's do it. I mean, sometime,
let's do it. Yeah, I'm sure we just lost half the audience.
Yeah,
Phil who?
Yeah. What?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Poco. He did album covers for Poco.
Poco.
Yeah. Okay, so Poco in America, and also
he did in America.
the logo for Crosby, Stills, Nash.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. It's very cool. So, so you get into high school, you start to get, we mentioned, you get into bands, you get influenced by your friends, new wave comes around.
Yeah.
The end of disco kind of stuff goes away, and it was kind of a weird era, that whole period where disco kind of died, the punk started coming in.
Yeah.
New wave mixing in with rock,
Yes.
the big rock bands with the arena, and then you sort of... I think got a little excess on the rock side, right? I mean, with this.
Well, that's what happened. It kind of
yes.
flamed out, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. You could simultaneously, let's take a slice through 1978. You had the punks were going strong, everything from the Sex Pistols to the Clash, who were kind of a bit more commercially punky sort of thing. And, the Ramones over on the American side. And there was lesser known bands now with Buzzcocks and Susie and the Banshees and all this Dead Kennedys, all this business. Then the new wavers notably Elvis Costello. Yeah. Much more listenable to my mind. I love
Costello,
Elvis.
Joe Jackson.
Joe Jackson
Gary
is a
Newman.
perfect example. Yeah, Gary Newman had the Two-Boy Army. That's right. Yeah. And then, simultaneously, you still had Fleetwood Mac and, the kind of later Genesis still stumbling around on these giant arena rock. And Queen, of course. Yeah. Can't forget Queen.
Well, that's sort of things. Like a band like Genesis really changed their sound. When you think of Abacab and Tuscan and some of their some of those albums, they really changed the sound. It was still proggy, but not old school proggy with violins and flutes.
Right.
And they kind of adapted to that. Whereas you think of Zeppelin, In Through the Outdoor, great album, but is it really Zeppelin?
Yeah, I know.
It's got Hot Dog on there.
Yeah.
Oof, if there's one song by Zeppelin that I'd love to erase from my memory, it's Hot Dog.
Yeah. No, I think they had 5 good albums in them, and then that kind of Zeppelin thing. I don't see how that could have gone on for 10 years.
No,
really,
it couldn't have. And I think the whole message of those big bands kind of was done.
Yeah.
You look at some of the later stuff, even by Black Sabbath, which when Ronnie James Dio came on, you're like,
yeah, I know.
It just wasn't the same. They lost. The feeling was gone, and that whole excess of this late 60s, early 70s. I mean, the famous stories of Zeppelin with their giant orgy plane.
Yes, of course, I know.
And that whole kind of stuff. And, I won't get into it, but the whole story about is it the octopus or whatever? Zappa's got a song about that. The Mud Shark story about Zeppelin, apparently. And,
really?
And John Bonham. Yeah.
Well, there's I think there's even only a few bands that have a solid 10 years in them. I mean, the Beatles, as you pointed out, I'm sure could have had a solid 10 years in them, but they really only were like a famous recording entity for 6 or 7 years. Yeah. Mind you, 200 songs over 6 or 7 years, and you'd be hard pressed not to recognize most of them. So that they're kind of unique there. The Stones were good for 10 years, I would say.
Exactly.
Maybe a year or two more. The Who, in my opinion, had longevity.
The Who also, some of their later stuff, Athena. Ugh,
oh yeah, no,
not a good thing.
No, I think that ended for them. It ended for me with Who Are You? Also 1978 sort of thing. Same as that's the one where Keith Moon has got sitting in that chair that says not to be taken away, and he dies 2 months later. And everyone's like, oh my God, sort of thing. That was a bit like, to me, Rolling Stones, Some Girls. There was these 60s bands that suddenly had this last gasp of energy and relevance, and then they kind of faded.
Their time was over. I think the only good song they ever put out after that would have been Eminence Front.
100%. Yes.
Fantastic song.
I agree.
And,
terrific song, yeah. I saw them in 1980. So after Keith Moon had died, what can you say sort of thing. But, and I recall thinking they were good, but I had seen The Kids Are All Right, because that movie made the rounds locally, or being blown away by that sort of thing. And what I saw at the Forum from The Who was not that. Yeah. It was the music was there, but it seemed to lack the...
So was that the 6th of their 8 farewell tours?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Might have been, yeah.
Yeah, I always remember... is it 1980? No, I was working in pharmacies. It was probably 81, 82. They had a farewell tour that was going to be broadcast live on TV.
Oh, I remember this.
It was a cold winter night, because I remember trying to get off work early to meet my friends, because we were going to go watch this at a friend's house, and then we're going to go downtown and, whatever. And I remember leaving work, finally got out, screamed back home. I was working in Anjou, screamed all the way back home, get to my friend's house, whatever. And we went downtown. That's the night, the famous night my friend ran into a parking meter. Allegedly ran
while in a car, or just
no. We were out screwing around, and his head right into a parking meter.
No kidding, eh?
And the story goes, it might have been me who pushed him. It might have been another guy. He may have been getting away from us. Whatever. He ran into the sign of a parking meter, cut his head open, ended up at the Montreal General. We had to, and I remember it was like minus 30 outside. It was like insanely cold.
Oh God,
insanely cold. Yeah, and he still has the stitches. I saw him recently. He still got the stitch. He still got the mark in his forehead. But that night is the night of one of the last Who concerts, right?
Okay.
And I think it was in Toronto. For some reason, I'm having this memory that it was in Toronto and it was being broadcast on TV.
Yeah, that's ringing a really faint bell for me. This business sort of thing, you know. So yeah, and of course they kept reuniting after that. You know? At some point.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember I like the Who. I really like the Who. I love their early stuff too, fun stuff. Yeah. But I remember at one point their big thing was they were the loudest band.
Kind of, yeah. I know. It was all about that, eh? Exactly, yeah. I know, yeah.
It's like they kept trying to shatter records.
If that's your calling card, I know. It's probably time to hang it up, you know? But they knew it, too. I mean, the good thing about Townsend was he knew it. I mean, he was very conscious of aging, sort of thing. I've heard him say this. And as much as they did kind of keep going, I agree with you that the only decent song I thought after Who Are You? 1978, you know, when as musicians, they're in their mid-30s at this point, right? These guys, so like 35, 34, 30, 36 sort of thing, was Eminence Friend. Yeah. And that's 1982. And then after that, I don't think they've done a thing since I would care about, you know?
No, exactly.
Like, you know. But I think the first, new wave, I don't know if they had new wave or not, but I guess they were, band that I saw was Dire Straits.
Okay.
And that was in 1979.
I don't think they're new wave.
What's that? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't even know what
the thing with Dire Straits is Dire Straits came out in the late 70s.
Yes.
And most people would thought they were they were back from the 60s because they had a sound that was a throwback to the old 60s sound.
Yeah.
Think of the Sultans of Swing, right? I mean,
that's what I'm thinking of. It was that album that I saw.
Exactly.
You know, and it was at a weird venue. It was at the Théâtre Calix-la-Vallée.
Oh, okay.
You know where that is?
No,
it's over by LaFontaine Park. Over by LaFontaine Park. So small venue. I saw them there, and I saw George Thorogood as well. Okay. Because I think my friends and I were in this mode of like, we'll go to see smaller venues, right? We kind of had it with the Forum. Yeah. We've seen Queen. We've seen Jethro Tull. Blah blah blah. Now we'll go. We'll get into like smaller clubs, sort of thing, right? Yeah. And I remember the Dire Straits being fantastic. Their opening band sucked, sort of thing, and they were called the Baruga Bandit from Detroit. I actually think I fell asleep in front of during their performance. I could always do that when I was younger. I could just sleep anywhere and just nod it off, and then someone like, okay, Dire Straits are here, you know? But that was terrific. Yeah, great show.
I find the best time to take a nap is while driving.
Well, yeah, certainly. Yeah, nothing else to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, I think it was new wave, kind of. I mean, Blondie. I think for me was
I like Blondie.
I really love Blondie, Parallel Lines, and Eat to the Beat. Two great albums. I had those.
Eat to the Beat, good one. Yeah.
To me, those are the only two albums. I tried listening to other things, but those two I can play. I can sing along to every song of both those albums.
Really, eh?
Oh yeah. I love those two. And then the Cars. For me, the Cars. When the Cars exploded onto the scene, it was a sound like I'd never heard before because it was new wavy, but it also had a bit of old school rock sound to it.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that they had two singers. Right, you had Rick Ocasek, and then you had Benjamin Orr.
That's right, the blonde guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so most of the people think of Rick Ocasek because in the later albums he did most of the singing. Yeah. And Benjamin Orr, Benjamin Orr, not Benjamin Moore,
not the paint guy. Yeah, not the paint guy. Yeah.
I think he does like one or two songs per album.
Right.
But I love those guys.
That was super tuneful, great precision to the music, and I mean, you could hear those hits all over the city all the time, right? In fact, I was playing trivia downtown last week in a bar, and one of the music trivia questions that the guy was, who was responsible for the hits Just What I Needed and Best Friend's Girlfriend in 1970. I was like, Cars. I was there. Mind you, a boring performance.
Oh, you saw them in concert, right?
I saw them at the Forum, went down, it was their sort of thing, and...
were they headlining?
Yeah, they were headlining,
really?
Yeah. I'm quite sure they were headlining. Yeah, I think so.
It's possible, because when they exploded on the scene, they were huge, yeah.
No, I'm sure they were headlining, and I can recall us we didn't have elevation for these tickets. We were kind of right at the back, and they just stood there like just stick figures, like just strumming their guitars. And we were like, oh, sort of thing. I mean, we used to seeing Freddie Mercury and Ian Anderson and whatever sort of thing leaping around the stage. So, but music was good. I don't recall that. There was another band I saw in there at the time. It was Graham Parker and the Rumor. Man,
I love Graham Parker.
Aren't you? Yeah.
Yes. I had the big hit, the big album. I forget what it was
Squeezing
called.
Out Sparks.
Is that what it was called?
I think it was Squeezing Out Sparks. Yeah. It's like you'll see. I think it's red, or no, it's blue, and there's like sparks coming out of his head. Not surprisingly.
The album I remember is Yellow.
Oh, Yellow? I don't know that one.
Yeah. Graham Parker. What the hell was the hit? The Up Escalator. Was that it?
I don't know that album.
Okay.
I knew Squeezing Out Sparks, or maybe I knew some other. But yeah, they opened for I don't know who. And I went out the next day and bought the album. I was like, this is fantastic. It had stuff like Protection on it, and Local Girls were the big hits, and some others. I mean, it's a while back now, but terrific band. And, not Led Zeppelin, not Fleetwood Mac,
Yeah, so the album I had was The Up Escalator. It's yellow with a bit of a weird red streak on it.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. That would have been 1980. I remember buying that. We had a country house up in Valmorin, and the neighbor across the street was a woman with her daughter, and they needed yard work done. And I remember going over and cutting down trees and stuff and branches and chopping firewood, cutting grass. Right. I got enough money, and I ended up buying that album.
Right. Yeah, that was it. It was a good point you said before. It was kind of like everything was happening simultaneously there, right?
Yeah.
You kind of had, and you had like the beginning of Michael Jackson, I think, sort of thing in like the early 80s or the late 70s. He was suddenly, it wasn't the Jackson 5 anymore, but suddenly he was there with his early hits. I was not a fan at the time. Yeah. Still to this day, I'll say something heretical here. I think he's overrated. I mean, I think he's, I'm not I don't understand how he became the king of pop, but that's me,
King of Pop, not it's just King of Pop.
King of Pop. Oh, there's no article there? Okay, King of Pop,
It sounds more pretentious if you take the article out.
It does, yeah.
It's just King.
Who are you? King of Pop, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think King of Pain, not actually,
The would assume there was other people.
So it would, yeah. And of course, there was the Police then, right?
Yes,
that was like talking about the new wave bands, right?
Yeah. And the police was weird when they came out. Like they had Regatta de Blanc, right? So you had that sort of reggae kind of sound. You had a bit of that reggae, and you remember the Stray Cats also at the time.
Yeah,
the
Stray Cats. Yeah.
So you had that kind of rockabilly reggae sound trying to make a comeback. Yeah. And with that, you had oh my God, what was the band? UB40.
Oh God, UB40
would have been 40 back then too.
Wine
they had red wine, exactly.
Yeah. I saw an explanation for that, actually. I was watching...
A Neil Diamond song, by the way.
Oh, is it Red Wine? I didn't know that. But one he recorded himself, or he wrote it for them, or something like that?
No, there's a recording of...
Because I'm actually a slight Neil Diamond fan. But I kind of like... I would... There's about 5 or 6 of his songs that I would stack into any kind of, pop music collection, like Kentucky Woman... And, Solitary Man. I think they're good,
Yeah. It's like Tom Jones, right? Tom Jones has some stuff that you kind of have to, as cheesy or whatever it was. We grew up with it, right? I mean,
she's a lady,
She's a lady.
Come on.
Exactly. I mean, listen, women threw their underwear at him, right?
No, so how bad could he be, right? But that's what it is. You look back at some of these artists now and you go, okay, 40 years later.
So women threw their underwear at him now.
Correct.
Do they bring underwear or do they disrobe there?
Curious.
And
I never looked into it. It's probably worth looking at. Yeah,
I think we could do an episode on that.
Yeah, we probably could. Yeah. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, the tossing of the underwear. I can recall my parents telling me that because he came to Montreal in like 1977. And I think my parents considered going, and they weren't concert goers, but obviously within their circle of friends, and they were in their mid 40s by now. That was the thing to do, to go see Tom Jones, and they didn't. But I can recall the panty tossing being a big topic of interest. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and you got to wonder if maybe there was some guys throwing their underwear too.
You got to wonder. I'm sure there was. Yeah,
I'm sure there was. There had to be.
Yeah. Handsome man. Why not toss your underwear out, right? Yeah. Hey, Tom.
What was it? The Welsh. What's his nickname? The Welsh something or other.
Oh, I don't know. I never heard that.
Yeah. Oh, I forget. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so big. To me, that's when I started going to see concerts. My first concert, like I mentioned, was Van Halen. I remember my first really memorable concert was April Wine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, big.
At the Forum?
At the Forum. A bunch of friends, maybe some hallucinogenics may have been involved. And I remember sitting there, and I no idea who opened up, and I remember the lights slowly dimming. as I'm starting to sort of get the buzz going.
Yeah.
Lights slowly dimming and the sirens coming on and and the show comes on and I was just like blown away after that.
Great performance band.
Yeah,
eh?
they're just great in concert.
Yeah.
Great in concert.
Yeah.
So yeah, favorite concerts.
Favorite concerts. Okay, so I would say, I think of one of the Jethro Tull, two of the three was a favorite concert. I remember the Graham Parker and the Rumor set. It was their set because it introduced me to music I wasn't aware of, and I just recall it being really, really well played. I saw the Kinks in 1984, so way after their prime.
Oh yeah,
in Ottawa or something.
Is that when they had Come Dancing?
Yeah,
okay,
that's exactly what that was. Yeah. And we were Kinks fans, and we said, okay, we're going to go down to Ottawa. I recall really enjoying that show. Do I have one favorite that like tops all the rest? No, but those are a few that come to mind, you know? The Queen concert that I saw in Montreal, that was probably touring behind News of the World, We Are the Champions and all that. Yeah. Because Freddie Mercury was terrific, you know, and, you couldn't, great show and all that. But, those are probably the ones.
Yeah, in those days, concerts were quite a show. I mean, they went all out, lights. I mean, today it would seem tame. Today, now the concerts have this gigantic screens behind them, right?
Yeah.
So everybody could see what the hell's going on stage. Back then, if you didn't have good tickets, you had to imagine.
Yeah, you had to imagine. You're right. You had to imagine. Exactly.
So if you're sitting in a terrible spot, you had terrible sound, and you could barely see the stage, right?
Yeah, but you didn't care. And plus the tickets that were costing you something like $10, through that classic period there. So, we were talking about this earlier, but like you think about what you could afford. Like we're all like, let's say we're 20, to make it easy, we're 20 years old. An album's going to cost you with tax $10. Yeah. Concert's going to cost you $10. We could all afford $10. That wasn't like a stretch. You're like, oh, okay, whatever, guess who's going to be here? Like, let's get the tickets, right? Yeah. $9.50, blah, blah, blah. The Rolling Stones, when I went to see them in Buffalo with the 3 opening acts, $12.50. 1978. Yeah. And again, that was like, oh yeah, $12.50. It's the Rolling Stones, a couple extra bucks, not a problem. It's like a beer of extra, whatever. I know things are a lot different now.
Yeah, especially now that you saw the Bruce Springsteen tickets, $5,000 for a ticket. I mean, this is insane.
Yeah, he's supposed to be some kind of people's artist sort of thing,
yeah,
like every man, right?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
So for me, I think in terms of favorite concert or best concert, I think it would have to be Pink Floyd, and I don't remember exactly the year. It was the year they came and they played 4 nights at the Forum, 4 nights in a row.
Did they really? I don't remember that.
3-4 nights in a row. And I think I got the second or third night, whatever. And I'd never seen them. I was becoming a big Pink Floyd fan at the time. Right. Like I think for me, I think the early albums I didn't really know as much. It was what introduced me to Pink Floyd. Obviously, was The Wall. Yeah. Right.
You saw them for Animals, probably, right?
No. Animals was way before that. I would have seen them. I don't know. Momentary Lapse of Reason? No, was that it? I don't know which album that would have been. It would have been after The Wall.
Okay.
Yeah, it was after The Wall. Okay. Definitely after The Wall. Great show. Unbelievable. All your hits. Sound quality. Absolutely fantastic.
I've heard that about Pink Floyd.
Giant pig being tossed into the audience.
Right.
Floating pig. I mean, how could you not love that? I wanted to go back and see them again, but they were sold out, right?
And they had 3 or 4 nights at the Forum.
Yeah.
Think about that, eh?
Yeah.
I don't remember that. I've never heard that, but imagine being able to fill the same venue in the same town 4 nights in a row. That's draw power.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just one of those really good concerts. And the other one which surprised me is a concert I didn't really want to go to, but it was at either Le Club Montréal or the Spectrum. I forget what it was called back then. It was Blue Rodeo, which I knew, they had a couple of hits, whatever. Diamond Mine had just come out, whatever. Right. And a friend of mine, his brother was a huge fan, so we went with him. And what I liked about that place is you could sit at the bar.
Oh, yeah.
You could sit at a bar and watch a concert. And it's like, you didn't have to get up to go get a beer during whatever. And they came on and they did a 30-minute version of Diamond Mine, which just blew me away. Nice. And the rest was they were super, super tight. Wow. Really, really, really tight.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. Another band who was really tight that I saw a few times was Red Rider.
Oh, I never saw Red Rider. Oh, interesting.
Really, really good, especially the album Neruda, which was to this day still one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It was a great concert. I forget if they opened or if they were if they were the main, headliners, whatever. I'm not quite sure, but it was that they were very, very tight. Blue Rodeo too it's nice, when you go see a concert or something, you listen to a live album, you're like, is that the same band?
Yeah, I know.
It's not that you want to hear exactly but when you're used to the sound of an album and then you go to a concert and they're completely off, or they're flubbing it or whatever. And this is the thing that I heard about Bob Dylan.
Okay.
So, for those who know, I have a deep, deep hatred of Bob Dylan.
As I discovered,
So, my boss, when I was working, one of my boss was a gigantic Bob Dylan fan. He's older than us, so huge Bob Dylan. Whenever Bob Dylan would come within 100 miles or 200 miles of Montreal, he would go, and he would go for every night. And I said, why are you going to see him, 2 times in Montreal and 3 times in Toronto? This is because he puts on a different show every time. I'm like, what do you mean he puts on a different? It's the same set. He goes, no, he doesn't always play the same set. And depending on his mood, he might do something completely different the next night. So it's like really seeing a different artist every night.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever.
Right.
Not a big Bob Dylan fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am a Bob Dylan fan, and certainly a man who's nothing if not idiosyncratic. I saw him at the Forum in 1978.
Yeah.
And although I don't think he was touring behind any major album as much as it was just time for him to come around. It was like 3 years after Desire, which had Hurricane on it, which to me was his last great album.
That's the only song I like by that.
Well, there you go, Hurricane.
Hurricane and maybe Lay Lady Lay.
Okay, Lay Lady Lay.
Because it sounds like it's not him singing.
No, Lay Lady Lay sounds like somebody else. It's weird, eh?
Exactly.
I know.
It doesn't have that drum.
See, I like that part, But you talk about the best concerts with it. The worst concert I ever saw, I actually paid money to see Bob Dylan. And that's the end of part 1. Next Tuesday, part 2 drops on Semi-Retired. You won't want to miss it.